a really fascinating author, probably the most performative author on our list.
The mindset and the ethic of Oscar Wilde is something that's very, very refreshing looking back, and something that we need to discover.
Hello and welcome to Better Read Than Dead, the Generation Liberty Book Club show. This week we are going to be discussing the only novel written by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a story of a young man and his obsession with eternal youth, and a very peculiar painting. I am very, very pleased to be joined this week by the Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs, Gideon Rozner. Thank you for joining me, Gideon.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, first time on the book club.
Now, Gideon, unlike the other guests, I actually assigned you a book for this show, so I'd like to get your initial thoughts on this novel.
Yeah, I wonder why you picked me in particular for this book, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Look, firstly, I absolutely loved this book, but as I said, I feel like I have to come here and give a right of reply to, I suppose, where the conversation will be going. You know, the evils of unbridled hedonism and the evils of superficiality and of free living and so on. But I haven't read much Gothic fiction. I haven't read anything from the 19th century, for a little while, and I hadn't read anything by Oscar Wilde. So absolutely fantastic book, and thank you for asking me to read it.
Yes, I thought you would find it interesting, though I'm not sure if it's definitely a condemnation of all those things, but we'll get more into those kind of moral details later. But you said this is the first thing you've read about Oscar Wilde, read by Oscar Wilde. Did you do a little bit of research about him himself and get interested in him as a character as well?
Well, look, he's always, I suppose, been somebody I've been broadly aware of and knew a little bit about, because he's an author and a great artist, but also a very well-known historical figure. He was, I guess, one of the first contrarians, one of the first bohemians. He really exemplified a mindset and a way of being that then carried right through into eventually the Beat Generation and the counterculture of the 1960s and so on. And frankly, it's something that we need back. The aesthetic philosophy, the idea of art for art's sake and the art of pleasure for pleasure's sake, the philosophy and the celebration of feeling good. And I suppose a kind of amorality, because everything these days is laden with typically woke ideology, but in any event, some sort of moral underpinnings, whether it be watching something on Netflix or, look at, ask Bella Debrera here at the IPA about arts grants that have been given out, and the way they're all about some sort of preachy issue to do with race or gender or sexuality or anything else. I think the mindset and the ethic of Oscar Wilde is something that's very, very refreshing looking back, and something that we need to discover.
Yeah, he's a really fascinating author, probably the most performative author on our list. He really lived his ideology. He was actually more well known as a character before he ever was a playwright or an author. When he was in university, people were making cartoons of him, and I've really liked the description of him as the eternal student, but the good kind of student, the student who was rebellious and wanting to live life to its fullest.
I knew a few eternal students back in my university days. They were in their 10th year of a undergrad arts degree as professional socialists, but anyway, Oscar Wilde wasn't like that.
No, definitely not. But talking about character, I think that Oscar Wilde's characters in this book are beautifully realised and really come to life. Who was your favourite character in the book?
Oh, Lord Henry, absolutely.
I knew you would say
Oscar Wilde's mentor, the devil on his shoulder, this older bloke who took this fascination for Dorian, and I suppose in a somewhat sinister way, but also with a little bit of benevolence, I guess, given where he was coming from, just wanted to corrupt him and just wanted to take this beautiful, unspoiled specimen of a human being and turn him into a mini Lord Henry with some success. And unfortunately, the whole experiment fell off the rails and he ended up going down the path that he did. But I'll set aside a quote, one of my favourite quotes from Lord Henry, which was when I think he was at a dinner party or something at the time, talking to some old dowager. And again, it was in these typical scenes with Lord Henry, it is this beautiful dialogue of, these wealthy older women or older blokes who are trying to rain on their parade and, say, no, you can't speak like that. That's not unconventional. That's a terrible thing to say. And Lord Henry especially just doubles down and down and down and keeps going. So he says at one point, to note the curious hard logic of passion and the emotional coloured life of the intellect, to observe where they met and where they separated, at what point they were in unison, at what point they were at discord. There was a delight in that. What matter what the cost was? One could never pay too high a price for any sensation. And isn't that so relevant and interesting in light of all the ugliness and the tension and the bad vibes, for lack of a better word, today? I mean, is the problem that we have too much intellect or too much passion, or is it they're completely divorced with each other with no semblance or relation in between? Are they too tightly fused? Something is all awry and haywire in the public debate, in the public consciousness, in the way we relate to each other, the hyper-politicisation, the bringing of ideology and these moralistic undertones into everything. That quote about passion versus intellect and the interplay, I think that you could open a book on how that relates to the weird dynamic of the 2020s.
Yeah, I really agree there. And one of the really interesting things about Lord Henry as a character is a lot of his quotes are actually directly pulled from serious articles by Oscar Wilde. Yeah. So he's actually the voice of Oscar Wilde, which is weird to think because he's seen as a corrupting voice. But then he's also the voice of the author as well.
Which is a common device as well.
Yeah.
A recent example is Lionel Schreiber, a couple of books I've read of hers recently, she references herself in one and then has a character loosely based on herself in the other. It's a reasonably common device and you can't always pull it off. But in this case, it is just, and maybe that's why I like the character so much, it is just the perfect facsimile of Oscar Wilde. And we don't hate Lord Henry either, do we?
No.
He's never seen as a sinister or a macabre or a particular likeable character. He's actually quite a likeable sort of a bloke. It's Dorian who becomes corrupted and insane and loathsome. But what Lord Henry projects is a kind of easy, satisfied, benign state of hedonistic, I guess an easy, benign amorality.
Yeah, no, he kind of lives life to its fullest and Dorian takes it a bit too far. But touching on the moral concepts within this novel, what did you find, do you think is the moral lesson? This is the big question about this book.
Well, the temptation's there to say it's a cautionary tale about, amorality, as I said, about superficiality, about the obsession with looks and youth and beauty at the expense of, kindness and finding a deeper meaning. I think that's a bit reductive.
Yeah.
Was Oscar when Oscar Wilde wrote this, did he really intend to say, don't listen to Lord Henry and just buckle down and live a life of convention? Was he really saying that Dorian would have been better if he'd settled down with Sybil Vane and had 10 kids and, lived a quiet life? I don't think that's what he's saying. What he's saying, though, I think he's saying is, well, you said, Dorian took it a little bit too far in the end. I think it was slightly different insofar as he became corrupted and driven to a kind of madness by it all. And I think what ultimately did Dorian Gray in was that his beauty and his eternal good looks was so, they were protected by this curse and frozen in time, and they became so captivating he could do no wrong. He was just, no matter how bad he became, they gossiped about him and tried to have a word to him, but nobody ever turned on him or said that what he was doing was wrong. In fact, he never got caught for any of his murders either. So I think what Dorian Gray's problem was that he became awash with undeserved praise and it drove him to a kind of madness. The morality tale, to answer your question in the very long-winded way that I've done, is I suppose there is a difference between the Lord Henrys of the world and appreciation of the aesthetics and enjoying being alive and really not worrying about deeper moral hang-ups in the face of daily earthly accessible pleasures. There's a difference between benign amorality and conceit. And what Dorian Gray fell victim to was conceit, with this idea that it was invincible, that he could kill, that he enjoyed killing and harming people and using people, that he took too literally the idea you shouldn't become too consumed by emotions, which is why he never had any remorse or didn't allow himself or genuinely didn't feel any remorse about what happened to Sybil Vane. It was that he became a bad person. I guess that the way my one-track libertarian mind to brings it back to, I guess it's a statement on the harm principle, on, do whatever the hell you like, just don't harm other people.
I think you hit on some really important points there, and it's actually a theme that goes through a lot of Gothic novels. And I think one of the real problems with Dorian is the split self. And you see this in Jekyll and Hyde and a lot of other Gothic novels of the time, is that he wasn't one being, he wasn't whole, he was separating everything. And even that he saw it as a choice between being a good moral being completely straight, and living a pleasurable life. Those two things were complete opposite, was the essential problem of Dorian, that he couldn't mix the two, that he couldn't put art and life together, that he couldn't put pleasure and morality together. He split them internally, like he split with the painting, is what essentially was his downturn.
Yeah, and I guess that's an interesting meditation on the theme as well, because I guess they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
The best religious traditions and the best moralistic traditions do celebrate life and being alive and sensory pleasures. Us Jews, when we have the Sabbath dinner, we bless the fruit of the vine. We thank God for creating the grape which gives us wine. So they're not mutually exclusive. I guess as well, it's the old cliche that the pursuit of pleasure, his obsession with exotic objects and so on, his trip to opium dens, it was a form of escapism.
Yeah, definitely.
He couldn't hack life.
And kind of bring that into a modern context, I think that you can see the sins of social media like that. Social media itself is not inherently bad, but the social media stars who end up taking a turn for the worst are the ones who are separated. They create this false image of themselves externally, which is different to their normal life, and that normal life eventually comes and creeps up and bites them in the back, or and ends everything. And I think the eternal kind of social media stars are the ones who are honest in themselves, people like PewDiePie and stuff like that.
Authenticity.
They're authentic. And Dorian was never authentic. Do you think that these kind of themes do tie into kind of modern social media times?
Yeah, they do. And I'm not the kind of person to indulge in moral panics over technological advancements. As you said, there's this narrative that social media is inherently bad. Now, is it changing the way we interact with each other? Of course it is. Is it allowing people to curate and project their lives in a way that's totally unrealistic and not quite the full picture? Yes. Does that make us in turn judge our own lives for the worse and occasionally feel like we're falling short? Yeah, it does. But broadly, human beings will adapt. We adapt to every technological change of this nature. We'll adapt to social media as a species, just like we adapted to fashion magazines. And I remember when I was a kid, there was this big moral panic about young women reading Dolly and Girlfriend and things like that because it gave them unrealistic body expectations and so on. Well, we don't hear much about that anymore because it's all about social media. There were moral panics over the invention of the television, and before that it was the radio, and before that, probably just before the time this book was written, the scare was paperback novels, which were giving young men funny ideas about the world, and young women, and just corrupt them
violent
sexually.
Video games. And before that, it was violent comic books.
Correct.
And before that, yes.
Correct. So I guess with social media, as with anything else, it allows, it enables the full spectrum of the human condition. That's what libertarians like me love about the promise of the internet, at least such as it used to be and can be again. This gloriously unregulated free space. But if you're going to completely open up the human condition, you have to buy the ticket, take the ride. It does allow for human conceit, for malicious vanity as opposed to benign, healthy vanity. So in relation to the book, I think there is the temptation to say that it's a cautionary tale about vanity versus morality. But I think, again, that's a bit reductive, and I don't think that's really the nuance the novel was trying to get at.
Yeah, but also talking about social media and this book, I think one of the main things that when I started thinking about those two ideas was like, I wish Oscar Wilde had Twitter. That would have been absolutely
Can you imagine?
amazing. I think out of all the authors on our list, I think he would have shone brightest on Twitter.
Well, he'd have to be one of the most quoted people in the history of the world as well. I was stealing his quotes for years before I even knew anything about him. You know, my favourite, which I live by unsurprisingly, which is there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. If he had 280 characters, yeah, he'd rack up 1 million or so followers, that's for sure.
Another really interesting part of this novel is the prelude, which I think definitely speaks to that this is not a reductive morality tale. And a lot of the concepts that Oscar Wilde brings up there are very relevant, as you said, to kind of modern wokeism. Did you read the prelude, and what were your thoughts on that?
I did read it. I read it before I read the novel, and then I reread it again last night. I think it's a wonderful manifesto, a very concise and beautiful manifesto about the aesthetic philosophy and art as Oscar Wilde saw it. And again, I make the point, we need more aestheticism. We need more beauty for beauty's sake. You know, we are politicising everything. We are politicising beauty itself. How much do we hear about, all these news stories about, such and such person who's redefining, challenging the idea of beauty, the Western ideal of beauty, and how we have to challenge it, and, all sorts of silliness that goes on there. We can't second guess those. Humans are aesthetic beings. We can't politicise it. We can't always rationalise or irrationalise it, depending on which way you look at it. And we can't feed it into some sort of equal opportunity, one size fits all, equal equality of outcome wokeism either. But there's one quote from the preface which I particularly liked, which just sums up so many people today. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. Now, isn't that the social justice warriors summed up? People who find ugly meanings in beautiful things, people who are corrupt while being utterly charmless. That is just the this was written in the 19th century, and he saw where it was going.
Well, I think it's Camille Paglia who talks about this real problem in universities today is you can't appreciate or love anything anymore. Everything has to be deconstructed.
Yeah.
These beautiful masterpieces and beautiful works of art have to be pulled apart and shown for their, bigotry and Western dominance. And it's just, can we please appreciate art for what it is? And
that's comprehensively demolished. Yeah, yes, everything.
Yes, it's really sad. And I think Oscar Wilde would be completely against what's happening. And I think one of my favourite quotes from the Prelude is, there is no such thing as a moral or immoral book. A book is either well written or badly written. And I think that's so, so true right now. Every work of art has to be looked at as, is it woke? Is it diverse enough? Is it this enough? Well, Oscar Wilde tells us to look at a work of art and say, does it bring me pleasure?
Yeah.
That's the simple thing that you should be asking yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it would be really wonderful if we could get back to that.
I had another quote, which I'm not sure if I wrote down, but it's also from the preface, which is something to the effect of, if a work is equally praised and criticised and loathed, and one other thing, it's valid and important and critical. And that's what we've lost sight of. We see controversy as sowing societal discord and interrupting social harmony. We're forgetting that art is often, especially in its time, confronting and uncomfortable sometimes and challenging. Bill Leake's famous cartoon made a very, very important point about Indigenous child neglect, but it was systematically it was used as a cudgel to destroy Bill Leake ultimately. Now we've lost sight of the role of art in changing our thinking and changing our perspectives on things. And no, I'm not talking about crappy public art that a local council puts up in some square. That is publicly subsidised garbage. I've nothing against stupid structures, but I do have an issue with paying for them. I do have an issue with Australian arts grants where people put wool inside them and knit it and things like that in ways that Bella Debrera describes, because it's publicly subsidised. That would not exist but for other people's money. But private art that's created and has deeper themes and meanings and viewpoints that we might not necessarily like. I think that's vital now more than ever.
I think there's a famous quote by him that's kind of similar to that, which is dangerous ideas are the only ideas worth having, which is very true.
Again, words I live by.
Also, I think people don't realise with this kind of censorship and touching on this kind of novel especially is, Oscar Wilde was condemned in the end for his sexuality. If we had the same kind of censorship that we have today, we wouldn't have had the gay rights movements. We wouldn't have had the liberation of people. Oscar Wilde sadly was not liberated, but the people eventually that followed him, that would not have happened because they would have said, these are our morals, these are our ideas, we're not going to allow any more further discussion, and that's what we're getting now. We're not getting progressive society, really. It's really weird that people call themselves progressive because ideas are not allowed to progress further.
It's a dark age.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, what is lost on a lot of people who still have the gall to plead tolerance and acceptance and love. These are, a lot of the time, take, gay marriage, for example, gay liberation. Now, most of the people who campaigned for and worked for gay marriage, 99%, I would say, are good people who just wanted what they asked for, marriage equality, fair enough. But there was always, and there still is, that hardcore of activists who are now and were back then acting with such a radical intolerance of anybody whose views are different to theirs. These people do not see how puritanical they are. We really have reached an age of a new age of Puritanism. Yeah, you can go to Mardi Gras and march around with glitter on in spandex if you want to. That's fantastic. But the intolerance for people who do, typically conservative people who do go against the grain of 21st century woke and alternative sensibilities, it's quite a puritanical development.
Very, very agree. And there's so many ideas in this book that are really relevant today. But going back to the story itself, just like to get your thoughts on the ending of the novel because it kind of ties everything together. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, spoiler alert, everybody, but it was a fitting end to the novel. It was. That's what I love about, and again, I haven't read a library's worth of books written in the 1800s, but when I do, I love the way they end. It is typically in that era so succinct and as you said, it typically brings things together. So the smashing of the painting, the final act of madness, the exposition of Dorian Gray as the sort of old disfigured bloke that he became internally. I think it was perfect and it was fitting and it just tied up a beautiful piece of writing.
Yeah, and I think it kind of illustrates again, it's that showing that he sins, that he wasn't as whole. So him stabbing the painting was his two halves coming together, and eventually him. So that became a reality, and he was dead, and the painting was restored. So it really plays into those Gothic themes again. So this was a question that we asked on our Instagram, and it went 49% and 51%. I can't remember which way it went. I think it was 51% no, 49% yes. So it was very tight. If you could have the gift of eternal youth, Gideon, would you take it?
Yeah, of course I would. Who wouldn't? Honestly, I would have 49, 50. I get the point. It is this. And actually, speaking of Lionel Shriver, I just read her latest, which is called Should We Stay or Should We Go? And the book is about a couple who are in their 50s. They decide they don't want to get old, and one of their parents suffers from Alzheimer's and dies very, very badly, and over a long time they said, no, I don't want to be like that. When we hit 80, we'll just take some cyanide, barbiturate pills and kill ourselves. But then they hit 80 and then the dilemma is what to do. And it's this beautiful book with 12 separate sliding doors chapters about each scenario, if they do it, if they don't do it, when they go to a nursing home, when they go to, go crazy in their home and have to go to a crappy nursing home. But there is one scenario in which one of these people joins a clinical trial of a drug that makes you reverse in age. And eventually everybody gets one. Birth ends up being extremely regulated because nobody dies. Everybody basically is 25 in this book. And in the end, it becomes hell because with eternal life, you do everything that there is to do. There's no linearness of your life. There are no life stages and so on. So I guess, it's easy for me to say, yeah, sure, I'd be young forever, but there is a downside to it, obviously. But on balance, I've had a Peter Pan complex for a very long time, and if I was able to finally get that eternal youth I've been chasing for so long, that'd be a lot of fun. I'd love to stay young forever.
I'd have to say I would say no.
No?
I hate to do the as a mother line.
You want to get old?
No, but I've had a child, and that's kind of the next stage of my life.
So your life is basically over anyway because you've had a child. Just kidding. Just kidding, everybody. Reads gorgeous.
Eternal youth is useless if I'm the only one staying young and I'm watching all my family age
true.
around me.
That'd be pretty depressing.
Also, I see growth, like watching someone grow in front of me. Growth is some of the most important part of life. And I think, like Dorian, if you didn't age, if you stayed eternally beautiful, I think you eventually would become corrupt.
Yeah, and you. It's such a shame because I do think that there is a lot of truth in the adage youth is wasted on the young. I guess I wouldn't like eternal youth, but gee, I'd love to live my 20s again. I love my 20s, but I reckon I could smash them out of the park. If knowing everything I know now, I could really make a good go at, let my uni days, for example.
But then you wouldn't make the same mistakes. I think part of the 20s that's brilliant about them is the mistakes are what define them.
Yeah, that's true. And what define you ultimately as well. But I see your point, all flippantness aside, I'm 34 now. I just got engaged. I'm, looking at houses and so on. There is something nice about progressing to a new stage of your life.
Yes.
And I think where a lot of people go wrong is they either are too much of a hurry to get there. They want to get married, when they're fresh out of school or whatever. Oh, sorry, but you did that.
Yeah.
In most cases, or they delay it too long. They end up being. Chris Rock has his joke, which is, marriage has its moments, it's good, it's bad, but you don't want to be the oldest person at the nightclub. You don't want to be that old person. So definitely. That is, I guess, the challenge, the existential challenge, which is recognising it when it's time, to move on to a new phase in your life and to do so gracefully. But I don't do a lot of things gracefully.
Well, as we come to the close of this episode, one of the things we always do on Better Rather Than Dead is recommendations. For the audience, if they enjoyed this book, do you have any other films, TV shows, books, works of art that you think they would enjoy as well if they enjoyed this?
Well, I guess two things. So firstly, in terms of something to do with meditations on age and growing older, the Kaminsky Method on Netflix, Ilya and I just watched it, my fiance, and it is brilliant. I mean, a good, decent TV show, sure, but it is just so nice. Turn on Netflix and see something that is just a good old-fashioned story with observations about the human condition that has nothing to do with race or environment or some goddamn thing. So basically, it's about an aging bloke who's an acting coach. He was a actor. He's in one Broadway. He won one Tony and then got washed up and now he teaches acting. But about his life, but it's just a really, really fun thing to watch. It's great. Lockdown fodder. The episodes are 30 minutes. If you have a spare Sunday afternoon and a hangover, it's a great thing to just binge through. It's with Michael Douglas, stars as this aging actor, and he's absolutely brilliant. The ending is just magnificent. I actually cried at the end of it. where Elliot thought I'd lost my mind. But secondly, in terms of a novel to read, again, I don't read a lot of Gothic fiction, but for a similar theme, I suppose American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, which I read for the first time last year, and that was my first lockdown reading binge. That's a similar story with similar, I guess, themes insofar as that's another, beautiful young man who got pretty corrupt and crazy and evil as well. So yeah, if you haven't read that, that's in my novels you must read before you die pile. Two
very good recommendations there. I would recommend More by Oscar Wilde. I'm going to be very simple.
Yeah.
Especially right now, we can't go to the theatre, unfortunately, and Oscar Wilde is very well known for his plays. But if you go to Audible, you can actually get The Importance of Being Earnest read by different characters, so it's like listening to a play. That's really, really good. And the only really good version of this book in film is the 1945 version.
Yeah, I was going to watch that. Is it worth a watch?
Definitely worth a watch, mainly because can't think of his name right now, but who they cast as Lord Henry is perfect.
Is that right?
And that's all that he needs. Lord Henry is perfect.
Well, you've just given me everything I need to do this weekend. So, I'll fire up the old streaming services.
So we're coming to the end of this episode. Gideon, would you do me the pleasure of giving our audience an idea of how to get involved in book club if they are not involved already?
Yeah, sure. Just head to generationliberty.org.au. You can sign up to our book club there. It's just $10, but it is free if you're a Generation Liberty member, and I certainly do recommend that because it's the youth outreach program that we put on here at the Institute of Public Affairs. If you do like freedom, if you do like liberty, if you do like ideas you won't learn in school and certainly won't see out there in the what passes for popular culture these days, please join, get involved and learn a bit more. And it's a wonderful thing you're doing, Renee, with the book club, because we don't read as much as we should, and what we do read is crap more often than not. And there is definitely a place for rediscovering the classics before the trots burn them. Well,
it's really nice to, discuss books and explore books without looking at them through the lens of, gender or Marxism for a change. And if you do sign up, you will get 3 free books, and make sure that you follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Generation Liberty now has TikTok, which is very exciting. But for now, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Gideon.
My pleasure.
It's been a wonderful episode, and I hope to see you guys next time.